Okay, remember that they are changing my voice. This video is about clarifying the fact that I'm one, the fact that I'm a moral supremacist, and the fact that life is about whether or not you obey God, and the only way to obey God is obeying God through me. So a few months back, or some months back, I made a video where, they were causing me a lot of cognitive impairment, what have you, and it was looking like I was going to, my flesh was going to die at that time. My soul will never die. And I said, I'm going to, one day, one way or another, judge everyone at God's right hand. Did you obey God through me? So, when we look at the measure of someone, right, the content of their character, in reality, not mere white social norms. For example, white social norms might cause people to blame black people for, the ghetto cultures. Now, where does the ghetto come from, right? The first time the word ghetto was used, if I'm not mistaken, was in Poland, right? The Warsaw Ghetto in World War II, where crime rates were really high, and Jews were being treated a certain way by eugenicists, who had learned eugenics from the English and the Americans, and they cited the Americans mostly. The term was coined by a person named Francis Galton. And of course, the English royal family didn't come out and say, hey, they're wrong about that, and other groups have gone beyond white people, right? Asians have gone beyond whites when it comes to academics, and so have Nigerians. In terms of in America, for example, culturally speaking, it doesn't make sense for their expansionist philosophies, continentalism, various philosophies that have to do with spreading white supremacy and arguing for white supremacy, right? You wouldn't think it was a good idea for them to expand into more affluent places of Asia, or maybe into Saudi Arabia. They don't need white culture there. In fact, no one needs white culture anywhere. White culture is basically Neo-Babylonian, Neo-Roman culture. And it's basically African witchcraft, which is something that's rather unfortunate, with a white man's twist. And I said that in 2009 as well. I said, Western culture is basically African culture with a white man's twist. Which one, right? Africa's a very diverse place. And so, in white culture, they might blame black people for black ghetto culture when the ghetto was designed by white people to create that effect. That's the effect that we saw in Warsaw, the Warsaw Ghetto, where eugenicists, who happen to be Germans, right? America has a lot of white German people. In fact, the biggest group of white people in America are of German descent. So there's people of German descent, and there's Ashkenazi Jews and gay people, and they're doing eugenics here in America historically, and they created the ghetto historically. They created the project so they could project something from there. They wanted people to suffer, right? They're sadistic, and they wanted to project certain behaviors so white people can act like they're superior. And they went so far with it, even after the Emancipation Proclamation, after the initial stages of Reconstruction, on and on and on, there's white police officers patrolling certain areas of town, telling black people to stay out of those areas of town, that they weren't allowed in those areas. Okay, certainly after a certain time, especially. And so they bent over backwards for a certain effect. And there's historically all kinds of psychological operations that were being run. The drugs were brought into the black ghettos, what have you. And these aren't minor events here. These are very much culture-changing events. It isn't, that happened all those years ago, decades ago, that doesn't matter. No. These were culture-changing events. They continue to this day. They never recovered from it. It's like if you shot somebody 10 times in the head, and then 5 years later you say, that happened 5 years ago. Well, they're still dead. They never recovered from it. It's the type of thing that they did not expect them to recover from. And keep in mind, if we took 100 children, okay, and that never knew what the ghetto was, right? 100 babies, and we had them grow up in a gated community where they never know what the ghetto is, they wouldn't exhibit any ghetto behavior. Some might be more naturally aggressive than others, but they wouldn't act in a way that's ghetto specifically because they wouldn't know what it is. So who was like the snake in the garden for black people when it came to ghetto culture? It was the eugenicists. It was these rich white Jews and LGBT people, and the masses of white Jew and LGBT people supporting them. Can they then go from there to say, hey, our race won the race? First of all, what race? Is it a race about doing God's work? You're supposed to obey God through me. I'm a moral supremacist, not a racial supremacist. So what the hell are you talking about? What race? You say we want to control the pace for the race, the rate and the pace for the race. The word rate is like the word race. The word pace rhymes with the word race, only one letter difference. Not a coincidence. So they say they want to control the rate of black success and then turn around and say, hey, not many of them are successful in this way, that way, and the other. So it's easily proven that if there was a different governance, like there are in places in Africa that are some of the most peaceful places on the planet, that they wouldn't have turned out that way. We know they assassinated Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King's family members died under suspicious circumstances. Okay. We know they've assassinated various people whose leadership would have affected the black community and caused them to go a different route. And these things, again, have lasting effects. You'd expect them to have lasting effects. If you have evil people rise to power for decades, and you remove the good people who might very well still be alive right now influencing the community, you expect the community to behave differently. And in certain places in Africa, they did not kill people for being righteous black leaders. Here in America, they did. And their communities came out differently. That's why the Bible talks about the vineyard of the Lord. It's a long process. It's a cultivative process. What are they producing? How good are they at it? How long have they been practicing it? And these ideas also affect communities and peoples and nations, what have you. So, as the white man uses a dishonest scale, as the racist Jewish elitists use a dishonest scale in their allies, their opinion means nothing. Since when have they ever used an honest scale? I'm the only person on this planet whose behavior reflects that they use an honest scale. Some people have a scale that is closer to mine, but they're not measuring things in a way that causes them to obey God through me, wittingly or otherwise. So either it's out of ignorance or it's out of ignorance in a different sense. Maybe ignorance that comes with more of an evil heart. So I've won, and I've clearly have proven that I have. And just like the video on the screen, I've been saying this for a long time. It hasn't gotten many views because it's suppressed by the main people who are expected to present an opposition argument if they have one. And the other people in the cultures and subcultures of America and the West and the world, okay, are obeying them and not obeying God, which requires obeying God through me. Proverbs 16:12 with Proverbs 24:21 makes it clear. The throne is established in righteousness and justice. No one else would even argue they're living a universally moral life. They wouldn't argue that their life is truly universally pinpointed moral precision. That's laughable because they use a white social norm scale. So it is with all these people saying that our system is so great and so on and so forth. Where does that come from? Black people who are universally reasonable, or white people who uphold propaganda and enforce white social norms which are derived from governing class sponsored propaganda? There's no other way it could be. Norms come from white propaganda, and they're ultimately derived from Rome, right? Rome colonized all of Europe, what have you, and Rome was influenced by Babylon. Baal's Roman counterpart is Jupiter, the main deity of Rome. The main idea of cultural control of Rome is Jupiter. In fact, Lady Justice, right, in the Greco-Roman myth system, is a deity of upholding the order of Zeus in Greece and Jupiter in Rome, first and foremost, before they consider morality. In other words, if I was to make this argument in ancient Rome, okay, the cults would move against me because I'm putting righteousness and thus myself above Jupiter and his cult and the Caesar and the Roman Senate, what have you. And so it is here in America. They're persecuting me because I'm putting God and myself above the wicked, which is God's order, and that is reality. All victories are in principle. Should I be afraid to say that the English, when they die, they're outside the divine order because no one is obeying God through me who's English or any other race? Should I hesitate to highlight Princess Diana and Elizabeth not going to heaven as I see fit? To make whatever example. Does not God make whatever example he chooses? In Ezekiel, making the Jews an example. All throughout the Bible, really. And specifically saying that's what's being done. It's not just obvious, but God told mankind through the prophet Ezekiel, as the story goes, that he made an example out of them. So when they cause me to have cognitive impairment and they act like they're doing something, who's really winning? Right? Ver means man. If you're not even a man to begin with, how could you compare yourself to a man if you're male? It doesn't make sense. If you're a female and you're not obeying God through me, that means you're prostituting yourself to other ideas, which means you're like a prostitute. What can a prostitute or a little boy that never grew up say to a man, or what can they say in regards to their comparison with God's Son? If you clash with the most righteous person that ever lived, you're not even a man, or you're a female that prostitutes yourself to falsehood, physically and otherwise, and otherwise is all that's needed. How can you say you won? You failed more than Tanya Harding. You failed more than Hitler. You failed more than Stalin. You failed more than Donald Trump to be a decent president. This is even his second term. Over 7 months into it. And he does not acknowledge that I'm here. And he doesn't pass an executive order to compensate me and to leave me alone. Doesn't pass my war on poverty plan, affordable farming program, nothing. You call that victory because he's the president? White social norms might allow you to say, hey, from my scale, he's the president and you just live with your parents. But with God's scale, I'm God's son. And your society is so pathetic while he's the president in it that they won't even give me enough money to allow me to live on my own. But nonetheless, my challenge continues. It continues on the money I'm able to produce, based on that, and also the money that's owed to me. And one of the requirements is people rally to me and make sure I'm compensated. But no one could beat me anyway, because you all are so far from being a worthy opponent. You wouldn't last in a fair match. I'd win 10-0 with one hand tied behind my back, because I'm God's son, and your philosophies and religions and nations and governing class has failed you. You lack the sense and wisdom and insight. I have won, you have lost. So, the last punishment that I pronounced against people, times 999 trillion, times end times penalties, times interference penalties, times extreme penalties, said 999 trillion times, is the judgment I pronounce on everyone outside the divine order according to their deeds, for the cognitive damage that they caused yesterday, and for them daring to challenge me and through their actions demanding that I conform to their culture. I serve God alone. Picture all of your ancestors cooking to the extreme, and picture the fate that awaits you and your offspring. Who do you think won? Even the agnostic knows it's stupid to fuck with me. And there's never been an atheist in human history that wasn't a dumb fuck, and clearly so. Dawkins and Hawking looking like complete idiots, looking like Dumb and Dumber, the Three Stooges, Humpty Dumpty, Ren and Stimpy, Pinky and the Brain, looking like dumb fucks. If someone can touch the tip of their nose with their tongue, does it make them smart? No. Someone happens to be good at swimming or painting, does it make them smart? No. They happen to be butt smart, does it make them life smart? No. Their lack of existential intelligence is appalling. They are a sick joke.